Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar on swim technique. The point of this webinar is to get all of the working triathlete coaches involved to discuss some of the main technique flaws that they noticed in athletes in 2024. It's wintertime, which is a good time to really dial in your swim stroke and to think about technique. We always like to make it a deliberate focus in January or February of each year. And that's the whole point of this webinar. So we'll just kind of hop around. I'll start the webinar by just talking about what a good swim stroke looks like, just briefly, and then we'll go coach to coach and share screens, and they can kind of talk about what they've noticed and offer tips on how to improve your swim stroke. And feel free to hop in at any point, as per usual. Um, we want this to be a conversation, so feel free to interrupt, and I'll share my screen here, and we can get going. So just to start, it's good to define what a good swim stroke is. And we all kind of know these things, but before we get going, it's good just to be reminded. Going from kind of the neck or the head down, number one, most obvious thing to look for is we want a neutral head position with the neck in line with the spine, and we want you looking down. Form, the goggles, the smart goggles, they actually did a big deep dive on their analysis. So Form, what they do is they can actually measure the head tilt if you're swimming in those goggles, and they establish that the fastest swimmers have a head tilt of 33 degrees ahead. So that's not really looking far ahead. Uh, the cue of looking straight down is good, but one big error we often see is athletes craning their neck up, head up, that causes the legs to sink. Ultimately, we want a long top body line with head in line with the shoulders, in line with the hips, in line with the ankles. So proper alignment or body position means that the hips are up near the surface, the ankles are cresting the surface, and that you're kicking from the hips, not bending the knees. You obviously want your feet plantar flexed or pointed, and you want a narrow kick, an engaged core, and you want to rotate about 33 to 45 degrees side to side. Um, I wanted to get this is Dan Smith swimming. He was an Olympian. He swam in the 4 by 200. And I just want to kind of talk about his stroke a little bit. You can see he has a really good stroke, and he's basically swimming with a two beat kick or kind of a three beat kick at times. But the main things to look for, um, as it relates to body position, you know, spine kind of in line with those legs. Look at that kick is narrow. His legs aren't splaying, which is tough to do when you're swimming with a two beat kick. Um, and his hips are up near the surface, and he's rotating kind of in between 33 and 45 degrees. You can kind of see that he looks ahead a fair amount, but you can get away with that if you're an experienced swimmer and you're engaging everything else well. But we don't want you to, try to look ahead. You kind of see here he's like in between 33 and 45 degrees. So he's definitely not looking forward at the walls. But one other thing I wanted to show you. So the other big important component of a swim stroke is a good catch. And I think Alex is going to talk about this, but you can kind of see he reaches out and he really kind of reaches over the barrel. You can see him getting his hand and forearm pointed straight down, and his upper arm is you know parallel to the surface of the water. So he's reaching out and internally rotating his shoulder here, and he's gripping that water really far ahead. And this is really important. And this is probably the number one thing that I like to talk about with athletes once they have basic proficiency and can float. It's this concept of trying to get that early vertical forearm. The idea is just to keep that elbow high and drop that hand and forearm vertically in the water and reach over the physio ball, so to speak. We want to have the ability to kind of draw a triangle from your armpit to your fingers to your elbow. You want that elbow to be above, your fingertips, um, obviously, and we should be able to, again, draw a line from armpit to fingertips, and your elbow needs to be above that line. And this is important. And finally, we want to think about core rotational power and pairing core rotational power with your pull to enhance the power of your stroke. You can see here, Dan Smith, he kicks down, which will drive rotation of those hips. And subsequently, he's going to pull on that side. You can kind of see it here. So he's going to pull on the left side. So he's going to kick down with his left foot, which is going to drive hip rotation up and to the left. And as that's happening, he's pulling. So he's rotating and pulling right here, which enables him to really tap into those lats and couple the power that he's generating from his core and transferring it into that stroke. So he's not just pulling with his shoulders and his arms and spinning his wheels. He's swimming with his core. So that's important. And does anybody have any questions on this or any comments on Dan's stroke right here before we kind of move on to all the other coaches?
One quick
Yeah,
comment about how to develop this and a good way to feel this in real life. So you can feel what it feels like to have this type of pull and power is to do deck ups. If you think about yourself lifting yourself up out of the pool, you want wide arms, because if you try to do a narrow pull, you're not going to get that power. And then as you're lifting yourself up, you can feel your shoulders internally rotating, which is what we want, and your elbows popping up. So doing some wall ups or getting out of the pool, just to feel that push of yourself out of
right.
the water is a really good way to feel this, but kind of set up the muscles and get that feel for the water before trying to do it in the pool.
Hey,
Definitely.
Something
hey,
else.
Conrad, it's Suzanne. I've got a question.
Hey, Suzanne.
Hey, in terms of like cues, right? Like as you know, I'm a two beat firm
Mhm.
two beat quick kicker, right? I've worked with a couple different cues over the years. One of the cues I have from you is to kind of get that if I get that right kick to to have the downbeat as I'm starting my pull on the right arm. And another cue I've used through the years is to have my left downbeat kick start as my right hand fingers are entering. Are those both valid? I've wondered at times if they're competing or if they're actually the same thing and it's just because of that forward motion once your fingertips go in.
That's a good question. And both of them are valid because all the as your as your right hand enters, you're really kind of dropping that left hand into the catch position and kicking down with your left. So there's really three things happening. And I like to think about like three different power contributors happening
Sorry.
simultaneously. And it's your right. So for example, your right hand is entering as you're rotating, because you think about it, as you're entering, you're also rotating and reaching out. And what that's doing is it's enabling you
Not
to reach
right.
farther, and increase your distance per stroke. But as you're entering, you're also starting your pull on the left side there. And so it is a good cue also to think right hand enter, left foot kick or left leg kick. Both of those are valid. Um, One good drill is to put, a fin on your left side and then a paddle on the left side or vice versa. Fin on the right leg or foot, paddle on the right hand. And just think about how that motion pairs the kick on the left side and the pull. It should sort of be happening The sequence, you can feel it better if you're wearing a fin and a paddle because it magnifies the impact of each propulsive mechanism there, the kick and the pull. So you should really feel the surge. So that's why I often talk about, the kick happens just before the pull because we want to think about rotation and pulling. So and that's happening on the same side. That's why I often talk about it on the same side. But with other athletes, an easier cue is definitely what you're saying. You know, right hand enters and the left hand is going to kick. Um, but you want to feel it too. So you don't want to just be robotic about it. Like right hand enter kick. It's like you need to understand where you are. Where is your left hand when your right hand is entering? Because if you swim with a really slow catch-up style stroke, which you shouldn't be most of the time unless you're drilling, then you might be
No.
kicking too early there. So um, anyway, bottom line, both of those are valid.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Hey, quickly, Elizabeth, I don't know if you saw the chat, but can you mute your mic? We're just getting some feedback from you. Thank you.
Yes. Sorry.
So
Just saw
sorry, I
that
didn't
and I
realize
was
I was
wondering who had
unmuted.
the feedback.
But yeah, we're talking about Elizabeth Ordeman. Sorry, I saw your reply to Elizabeth Rose. Thank you. We got two Elizabeths on the call.
Hey, I want
One
to jump
other
back
thing.
to
Oh, go
Chris
ahead.
real quick when he's talking about the deck ups. If you guys play around with the how far out, how wide or how narrow you are, you can feel where the leverage is of how efficient it is to pull yourself up. So obviously the most efficient is going to be about that shoulder length stance to pull yourself through the water as well. So if you're too wide, you won't be able to pull yourself over a wall. If you're too narrow, the leverage won't work either. So as you guys are doing deck ups, think about try a couple different areas and see where you have the most leverage, and that'll be where you need to be in the pool as well.
Definitely. Your hands kind of need to be pulling right under you or right kind of along the body line, basically like you're saying, Derek. This image right here is of, a woman sort of pulling herself up onto a box. That's the whole point. You can kind of see where her hands are, but we want to avoid, reaching out too wide, and you don't want to be pulling too narrow and crossing over because then it causes you to fishtail and you have to scissor kick to get back in line.
And
Um,
it's worth getting video too, because when we were down in Florida, Conrad pointed out as I was getting fatigued, my arm goes out wide. So you may think you're going at a certain depth or you think you're in line with your body, but until you actually see it on video, you can't really correct it.
And an easy way to track that when you do get fatigued is if you do a quick count of like how many strokes you have at the beginning of like a 200 or a 300. And then at the end of that rep, just do another quick count. You'll be able to tell just if your count, most likely it will go up. That means you're not getting as big of a pull as you could and as you were at the beginning of the rep. So then knowing that if you can course correct of like, am I too wide? Am I too narrow? Am I crossing over? Or am I just not getting that catch at the start? So that's a quick fix to see like if you're by yourself and you don't have a video to check yourself.
that's a good one. We definitely know that as athletes fatigue, their stroke count goes up to maintain the same velocity in the water. And a big reason is because they stop swimming with their core, like you're saying. There was one study that it used electromyography, where it's just measuring like the activation of each muscle group. And as athletes fatigued, as swimmers fatigued, um, stroke rate would go up to maintain the same speed, like I said. And one of the first um, muscles that reduced the electrical impulses that they were creating was like the core muscles, the core rotational muscles. So you have to focus on it. You have to focus with leveraging your core as you're swimming. Just think long and strong when you're starting to fatigue. Anybody have any other questions here? Kick, rotate, pull using lats, like we said, and then pull directly beneath you, not too wide, um, etc.
One thing about the eye angle is that one reason that at least beginner swimmers look up is because they're afraid of crashing into the wall. So if you focus on a good turning point, figuring out like when you want to flip turn or when you should start feeling for the wall. If you are a flip turner, the beginning of the T at the end of a lane is a good place to do it. But just getting comfortable of where you want to start turning allows you to focus less on looking up for the wall and being afraid of crashing into the wall, and be able to keep that nice 33-degree angle or thereabouts as you're swimming.
Definitely. That's good.
One
I called
one
in.
more. I see you, Jennifer. Give me 1 second, and then we'll hear from you. So one additional thing I want to call out. We're talking for an hour about like swim technique, and we're gonna go over like videos or like common flaws a bunch. I encourage you to be writing this stuff down, and also don't go and try and do everything all at once. Something that's very true about swimming is, and really anything is like, it's best to practice one thing at a time. So, like, figure out which of these things that we're discussing might be most applicable and like most actionable for you as a swimmer, and work on that thing until you don't have to think about it at all. And then start working on the next thing. It's really easy. I'm guilty of it myself. Like, I had 3 or 4 things, and I'm like, I'm gonna think about all this stuff. And what will happen is your whole stroke's gonna go to garbage. You're like not really gonna be able to focus on what you're trying to work on, and you won't improve like as measurably in one or like across all of these different things that you're trying to work on instead of just working on one at a time. So just one thing to call out. I saw Jennifer was here and then left. So I hope I didn't interrupt her, and then she decided not to be a part of the conversation anymore.
Way to go, yo.
What,
Um,
one last thing before we move on, I just wanted to call out, since I'm not gonna t pretty much talk at all beyond this, but the when I was talking about combining kick, rotation, and pull, and I mentioned the paddle and fin, I just wanted to kind of talk about it quickly here. So the idea would be, if you wanted to learn how to time your 2-beat kick better, you want to have a fin on, say we're working on the left side, fin on the left foot, paddle on the left hand. And what we want to do is think about this part right here. So you see how he's going to kick down with the left foot. It's going to drive rotation and increase propulsion. If you have a fin on your left foot, you're going to surge forward right as you're pulling with that left arm. And if you're using a paddle, you're really going to feel that. So if you're swimming with one fin and one paddle, you're going to feel that surge. And doing that can help. Anybody have any other questions or comments on this swim video?
Hey Conrad, what about the you're talking same side paddle and fin. What about doing opposite? And maybe you're covering this in later stuff. What about doing like opposite hand, opposite foot paddle fin combos to correct like imbalances there as well?
I mean, there's an application there. The cue then would be what Suzanne was talking about before, which is entering as you're kicking. So right hand enters, left foot kicks, and vice versa. So the paddle will just magnify that for sure. Um, so that's something good to experiment with as well. But make sure you know what you're doing when you're drilling, and you're not just randomly swimming with a paddle and a fin randomly. Understand it, talk to your coach, etc.
all righty.
So then, Alex, feel free to share your screen.
Yeah, you have to let me. There we go. Thanks. All right. So I am gonna specifically dive into the catch itself, which had a great little layup from you guys. Thank you. And where you're starting that catch and just like the mechanics of what your arms are doing. So one of the biggest problems that I have seen over the past year, and just like a very, very common recurring problem, is that when you are entering that catch, your elbow is dropping, like that second and third picture where their elbow is lower. into the water. And I think Chris is going to touch on where your hand is entering a little bit later, but specifically thinking through those like muscle ups and like where you need to think through where like your pull is occurring. You really want to make sure that like your elbow is above your hand in that water and that you're engaging your whole arm down to your lat and like your entire core as you're getting that like good pull to pull it in. If you look at the second and third picture, you can see that their elbow is low and they're just not generating any propulsion off of that. And especially the second picture, her hand is out straight. So like from here to here, she's getting nothing power wise from her pull. And so I have a quick video, and I'm sure everybody knows what this looks like and feels like, but if you can tell, this individual is just like not getting any pull out of his stroke. And so he's just kind of, we'll get into like the angle a little bit later, but if you can look, it's just, this is a little bit better. He's starting to get like a little bit more of a pull, but this elbow is so low that if you saw how quickly his hand went from, oh, it's going too far, but from here to here, it was just gliding through the water and he doesn't get anything out of that right here. It just goes quickly until he gets into that pull action. And you just really want to like maximize your catch on that. Obviously, like there's kicking and everything to go with that too, but it's so important to get that big catch because it can affect your body position, it can affect how you're breathing, it can just like I mean, you literally are pulling yourself through the water. So with that, I have a couple drills that I like to recommend to kind of help with that.
Real fast is can other people see? Are you sharing your screen? I don't know why it's not showing up on my.
Oh, you
Yeah, I
can't
can
see
see
my
I
it.
can see it. I
Yeah.
can see
Okay.
it.
Maybe it's because I
Oh,
have two monitors. Sorry. Keep going. I can't.
I was like, what the heck?
I was
How
like,
come
I'm
nobody said
surprised nobody
anything
else
yet?
was saying anything, but
It's because you don't know how to do a meeting without sharing your computer. Okay, so everybody can see now and has been able to. Okay, cool, thanks. So some of the drills that I like to recommend to really focus on getting that feel for the water. And kind of before I get into all of that, when we talk about drills, like Derek said, we're going to throw a lot of things at you over this hour and just really try to like take it one step at a time. My favorite thing to do is to like get those toys, like the swim toys, and make it so that you are only physically able to focus on one thing, right? So if you want to only focus on what your hands and arms are doing, put a pull buoy and put fins on so that you don't have to think about the bottom half of your body. You're going to float and you're going to be able to glide through the water with a little bit of a kick and really only focus on what your arms and shoulders are doing. And then vice versa with, something with a kick. If you're putting paddles on, like anything that's allowing you to kind of stay afloat for half of your body and focus on that other half, put all the toys on that you have to. So with that, some drills that I like are single arm drills. So that's just, one arm is going to stay out in front of you and you're just going to pull and then return it back, right? So you're just coming here and then that arm is coming back up to the front of the pool. And you'll be able to tell pretty quickly whether you're getting that propulsion from the start or if like you're missing and your hand is gliding back. So the slower you go with drills, the better. I'm just really focusing on thinking through what does this feel like? Where am I pulling? When is my body starting to rotate? But the biggest key, like the easiest way to think about it when you're pulling is what is your hand doing? Making sure it's not gliding backwards parallel to the water. You want to start that catch by angling your wrist and then really getting a good pull in front of you with a high elbow instead of letting that elbow drop. And then the next step up from a single arm is the catch-up drill. And that is just, obviously very simply, you pull once, you return back, touch fingers is my biggest way to remember that. And then you pull with your second arm. And that way you get to feel if one arm is stronger than the other one and if there's any different, anything different happening form related. From there, I like to look at like sculling. And this is, you can do sculling a million different ways. How I like to do it is I have fins on and I have my two hands in front of me and I am just coming like ever so slowly in and out and making sure my elbows are not dropping. And you like this should take a long time to get to the other side of the pool while you're sculling. That's the point. This is not a fast drill. It should basically look like you're floating and you're just ever so slowly moving the water and you're slowly going a little bit forward. But what it's doing is it's allowing you to get the water in your hands. Has nothing to do with like your core or your arms or anything. It's just your hands and it's just you're just moving it with your hands. And that really lets you just feel the water. You just want to be comfortable with the water. You want to know what the water is doing, what you're doing to the water, and vice versa. And then finally, my last tip and drill for a good catch is a sighting drill, and that is very simply kind of keeping your eyes above the water a little bit and making sure that your elbow is coming high, which is going to help you be able to pool high underwater. This one, again, I would probably put fins on, maybe not so much a pool buoy because you want to make sure that like your core is engaged for this one. But if you are dropping your elbow underwater, you will immediately sink. So this is a fun one to do because if you don't get that catch correctly, you'll sink into the water. And it's also an added benefit because we need to know how to sight while we're racing. So this is also a sneaky way to get a little ab exercise in. If you do a couple laps of this, like during your warm-ups, it'll greatly improve just like your overall core functionality in the water. Okay. And then lastly, and then I'll open it up for questions, pulling, kind of with all of these things, especially with the sighting drills, another issue I see a lot is your head is too high and then your butt sinks. Very similar to like, we want to look at the bottom of the pool. We want to look at that 33-degree angle down. If your head is up, your hips sink, right? So one of the things I tell some of my athletes to do is to understand what that feels like. Is put a pool buoy in and put it all the way up, like touching your butt. And that's just going to give you that extra lift so that you kind of can feel what your core and your like the top half of your body need to do to keep you there. And then you slowly can like start taking that pool buoy out. But it's all about like, how do we add things to the warm-ups and like the drill part of our swims that help us understand how we're moving through the water. So I will leave you with, to swim fast, you have to swim slow. That's my favorite saying for that. But what questions do you guys have on those drills? If anything, otherwise I will pass it off.
I have a
All right.
question, Alex.
Yeah.
You might have said this, but when you're recommending single arm drills, which arm are you stroking with and which side do you breathe to?
That's a good question. I didn't mention this. You can do it both ways and it depends on how comfortable you feel. So the easiest way to do it is to breathe to the same arm that you are pulling to. Obviously because your other arm is out here and you're able to kind of scull out in front of you in that water to keep yourself afloat. The second piece of like a single arm drill is if your arms are at your side and you're taking a stroke. And when you take that stroke, you can breathe to the other side because you're rotating and then come back in. So you can like give yourself goals and like level up within the single arm drill and breathe to both sides. But I would definitely start with breathing to the same arm that you're stroking with.
Yeah, breathing to the same arm and like arm that you're not stroking with out in front of you, like you demonstrated. Like if you haven't done single arm drills and you try the two that Alex just demonstrated, the second one is way harder than the
Yes.
first one. Like not having your arms at your side is way more difficult. All the more reason to like to use fins, use pull buoy when you're doing a lot of these drills because it allows you to actually focus on the drill and not focus on like not drowning while you're trying to like do a drill that is supposed to make you a better swimmer.
Yes. Fins are our favorite tool. All right. Thanks, guys. Caroline, I think you're up next.
All right. Hi, guys. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about poor kick timing, and we did touch a lot in the beginning. Conrad mentioned a lot of the things that I am going to talk about, but that's great. So I will share. Well, I had Mitch this morning, actually. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Okay. I had him do a non-example of poor kick timing, and just let me back up real quick. So with the kick, as Conrad and we have been talking about, you want the same side arm to be catching as you're making that downward kick on the same side. And so what I see a lot is people just over kicking and kind of sporadically just kicking as if their legs are just a motor behind them versus like timed with their actual stroke. It should all be kind of one timed in sync thing, not just again like a motor. And with that, a lot of times I'll see the legs splaying out instead of keeping them pretty narrow, and you want the ankles relaxed and your legs kind of in line with the shoulders, or kind of within that shoulder width distance, instead of splaying out like this. So I had Mitch kind of do that. I slowed it down a little bit, but you can see how his legs are just splaying way out. And it's kind of just a sporadic kick, and the arms are just like doing what they're doing, and the legs are doing what they're doing, instead of timing it all together. So, yeah, I guess you can see that. And then I'm going to share, I mean, like what Conrad was showing was a good example of just, good kick timing. Wait, can you hold on? Let me see if I share the right part of my screen. 1 second. I forgot how to share a different part. Okay, here. So then this, so like with that, there's, different types of kicking, 2-beat versus 4-beat versus 6-beat. And if for those who don't really know what that is, like we were talking about the 2-beat kick, which is what I personally use and what is usually more efficient for endurance swimmers and like long distance like we're doing. But sometimes a 4-beat kick could be implemented. But what that means is just basically a 2-beat kick would be 1 kick per stroke. A 4-beat kick would be 2 kicks per stroke. And a 6-beat kick would be 3 kicks per stroke, which basically just looks like continuous kicking. But that I would recommend more for like sprints. We don't typically use that very much. Anyway, play around with that and you can find what works best for you. But anyway, let me show this. Just another example of kick timing. So this is him using a 4-beat kick. Just to give another example, so it's kind of 2 kicks per stroke, where it almost looks like there's a little bit of a pause on one side as he breathes, but essentially that's 2 kicks per stroke. But the 2-beat kick is probably the easiest to understand in practice to really get the kick timing. And again, that's what I primarily use. And so then with that, I guess the drills that I would recommend, and we did also talk about this too, but doing a drill with the fin, either both fins. There's a couple ways you could do it, but just fins on in general with no paddles, but just focus on the downward kick with the stroke. I think that also a good one that Conrad mentioned was the single paddle on the same side. So left hand paddle, left foot fin. That way you can really feel the propulsion and really feel the water as you're making the catch and making the kick on the same side. And you can kind of focus on one side at a time while you get that down, switch to the other side. You could do like a 50 with one side and 50 with the other side. And you could also do that as a single arm drill too. Kind of like what Alex was talking about. Just do single arm drills, but focusing on the downward kick at the same time that you're making the catch. I feel like there's a lot of drills you can do, like a lot of same drills you can do, but focusing on a different thing. They'll help for both. But one more would be just catch up drill, where you're waiting till you make the catch, or you're keeping this hand out in front of you until this one comes to meet. That'll just kind of force you to slow down. And then as you're making the catch here, then you're also focusing on the downward kick on that same side and just really slow down and exaggerate that. And like Alex also mentioned, like these drills are meant to be slow. They're not meant to get you from point A to point B as quickly as you can. So don't worry about time or pace on them. And just use and like know what they're supposed to be for. So if you do have a question with like if your coach gives you a drill to do and you don't know what it's supposed to be working on, ask, because if you put intention behind the drill, that's what's going to help you understand what you're supposed to be working on and you know make that translation into your stroke when you're actually swimming fast. Um, so yeah, that's about all I got. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a quick cue that might help some people with the two beat kicking that's helped me a lot. Because often, if I'm out of the pool for a while and then I get back in the pool, I feel like hips, legs, arms are all on different pages, and you want to get it all on the same page. And for me, it's easier. Well, it's hard to think about the down kick at the same time as my catch, but just another way of looking at it is when your right arm enters the water, your left kick should be kicking down. So it's just opposite. Like when your right arm enters, left kick down. Because if you think about it, that left down kick will push your left hip up and drive the catch with your left arm. So it's the same thing that you're saying, but it like for me, it just helps like it makes things a little snappier and it just keeps my rhythm in line a little more. Just thinking about like opposite arm enter or like one arm enter, opposite leg kick down.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that's what I think Suzanne mentioned that in the beginning, like which cue makes sense. And that's similar to what we had talked about, where like, yeah, you can think about it whichever way makes you wrap your head around it
Yeah. There are
better. So
infinite
that's
ways
great.
to like talk about these things.
Yeah,
It's like some things it's like it clicks and then other things can be explained to you a million times and you can't get it. So it's like
totally.
don't feel bad if you like can't understand one way of looking at something.
For sure. One other thing I'll touch on, I know Dio is going to talk about breath timing, but one thing with that, a lot of times it helps to engage your core by focusing on the breath as well. So like on as you're making that downward kick, the same time you're turning to take your breath. But to sync everything together, it really helps to engage your core because we talk about the arms, talk about the legs, but like what's in between all that that's creating that power. And so with I talk about the exhale breath a lot, but like being able to focus on the exhale, it'll help you again engage your core and exhaling underwater, and then you're turning to take that next breath. I know that was kind of like four things in one, but tying in the breath also helps to then tie in your core and then to tie in everything else too. So just one thing I wanted to touch on. But yeah, Derek will talk a little bit more about the breath timing there. So I didn't get too deep there.
I have a question about kick power when you move from like 2 beat to 4 beat or 6 beat. So when I do 2 beat, I feel like that kick, the one on each side, is pretty powerful and it feels good. But then when I move from a to a 4 or 6, that initial kick isn't always as strong. And I feel like the power of the kicks, I guess when you're mentally thinking about it, for those of you that are real skilled swimmers, is that initial kick in a 4 beat kick stronger than the one that follows it, or should it all be pretty consistent? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good question because it can sometimes look like there's almost like a lag when you're taking
Yeah.
the breath, and that's where you're kind of like, yeah, taking your breath and almost gliding a little bit. Um, I don't know if it would be one is more powerful than another. I don't know if anyone wants to chime in on this one. Yeah, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely dependent on a swimmer's skill level, but for the most part, triathletes are not getting a huge amount of propulsion from their kick. So if you're talking about like feels more powerful from keeping your hips and your heels at the top of the water kind of thing, then like maybe that is the case. I do feel like when I'm kicking with a 2 beat kick, like there's at least like a little bit more movement and maybe feels like more force. Um, than when I'm kicking with a 6 beat kick because you can kick a little bit like less powerfully and your hips will still stay at the surface of the water. But from a like, are you moving yourself through the water more quickly with those more powerful kicks? Most non like sprint swimmers and especially people that are like doing triathlon and like come to swimming later in their life are like not getting a whole lot of like propulsion through the water from a kick. I don't know if that is addressing some of your question. I see Miguel's got something to say too.
Well, I just have a tip from one of my buddies who um I'll try to remember his times from Olympic trials this year. He won a 149 in his 200-meter free and like a 349 in his 400-meter free. And so you'd think like someone with that kind of speed like just drives their stroke with the kick propulsion like they have to, but it's almost the opposite. Like his advice and the thing that he thinks about with his kick is the kick drives your rhythm and your rotation. So it's okay to have like when you're thinking about a 2 beat kick, like that propulsion that you get from that one down kick is driving your hip rotation. So that's okay if that kick is stronger than the other two that you're filling in the gaps with. Um, so I guess like working off of that, my advice for like thinking about your kick as you're incorporating more than a 2 beat kick is to still think about that important down kick that drives your hip rotation and those other kicks to fill in the gaps, like keep your hips up and keep you moving just a little bit, like it fills in the dead spot. Um, so yeah, thinking about like as you take that 2 beat kick drill into your other kicks, like still think about that hard down kick to drive your hip rotation.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that was great. And I think one other thing, like everyone is different with like what feels the most efficient for them. Like I pretty much, no matter what pace I'm swimming, I pretty much do a 2 beat kick. Every once in a while, I'll throw in a 4 beat kick to feel if that felt better, or I don't know, just try it out. But I always feel more efficient with a 2 beat kick. So that's where it could be different for other people. So definitely play around with it. But yeah, like he said, using that one to like, if that feels more propulsive and then the others are just kind of there, whatever gets you into like, helps with the hip rotation and helps with keeping the hips up. And that's where, yeah, you can kind of play around with it and see what works best for you. Anything else on the kick timing? Okay, I think Chris, you are up.
Awesome. All right, let me share my screen here. Second. All right. Here we are. Should do it. All right. 1 second. All right, I have to grant permission here. Try it again. There it is. Okay. All right. Can you all see my screen? Awesome. All right. All right, so I want to talk about the entering at too steep of an angle when you are doing your catch. I've got a quick video to show you. This is one of my athletes in an endless pool. I want to point out a couple things. From this angle, you can really see how, especially on his right arm, so the one that's coming down right now, you can see that he's coming at a pretty steep angle. And the thumbnail right here really shows that he is a good, I would say, 12 inches under the water when he's starting his pull. So ideally, as we saw in the previous videos, you want to have your water just under the water surface, maybe 3 to 6 inches at most, because what that's going to allow you to set up is a shallower catch and that earlier vertical forearm that Conrad was talking about. So entering the if you are angling your catch and pull downwards like here, you're losing a lot of power and you're dropping your elbow also consequently. So we do want to get, as you're entering the water, we want to extend straight out, slightly underneath the surface of the water, and then begin that early vertical forearm and that catch and pull. Ways we can fix this is the 636 kicking and sculling to understand how it feels to enter and reach shallow water. What I mean by 636 is that you are on your side, arm extended out in front with the hand just below, I would say about 3 to 4 inches below the surface of the water. Getting that, focusing on that rotation and stretching your arms straight out. You should feel your armpit open up and your ear pretty much right next to your arm. You're going to kick for 6, stroke for 3, and then you're on your opposite side doing the same thing, focusing on keeping that arm straight out in front, reaching towards the wall. So that's one of my favorite drills to deal with this. Side kicking does the same thing. Right arm down, right arm down, left arm back. But both of those with a focus on keeping your hand at a shallower place. Does help get that feel for the water of where your hand should be at the beginning of your stroke. Superman drills, similarly, this is actually a good place to start if you don't know what it feels like to have your arms outstretched. And that's where you're just kicking with fins down, keeping your hands keeping your hands shallow as you're kicking down the pool. Kicking against the wall is also another good one, because you're forced to keep your hands up. And then finally, one of my favorite paddles that I use is the Finnish Freestyle. My college coach put me onto this, and I've been using it ever since. It is my favorite paddle because if you enter shallowly into the water or come in at too steep of an angle, the paddle stops working and you feel it. So it forces you to reach out with your arm and come in at a shallower angle underneath the surface of the water rather than coming in at a steeper angle with that straight arm. So highly recommend the Finnish freestyle. Similar with this drills, whether it's the Superman, the 636 or the side kicking, these check a lot of the boxes of other coaches talking on this call. One thing that I like, it's these really good kind of jack of all trade drills. It's good to focus on one thing at a time with each of these drills. So if you're focusing on that early vertical forearm, catch-up drill is great for that. So focus on early vertical forearm when you're doing the catch-up drill, or when you're thinking about how far out you want to reach your arm, and how shallow you want to reach your arm. Just choose one focus at a time and go through those drills. So it's okay to keep one drill with different focuses throughout your swim season and your swim progress. That essentially is swim angle, and that's the common problem that I see. Any questions on that? Awesome. All right, I'm gonna hand it off to, I think, is it Dio talking next? Yep, Derek Owens or Derek Stone. What are the Dereks?
Derek Owens is going next.
Derek Owens.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Over to you, Dio.
Hi everybody. We have a sick household, and so my daughter is not a daycare today, so she's hanging out. Um, but actually, Chelsea, we take her right now, just because I'm talking to. Bye bye, Sierra. All right. Well, I'm talking about breath timing, and uh, let me share my screen real quick now. Doing all this like sharing back and forth. Let me make sure I got this up. Okay. Here we go. So there like are a um ton of things that have already been covered, ton of drills that have already been talked about. And I think we're going to see a lot of this come, like, I don't know, we'll see a lot of this in this person's stroke. This is an athlete that I coach. I went and took a video of him. We could call out a lot of different things about this person's stroke. But I want to be focusing specifically on breath timing for him. And there's going to be like a point we will have it slow down here for a second. And then we're going to have it pause. Let's see. Just let everybody kind of watch this through. We can see right here where that screen paused for a second. He's like already, sorry, video isn't playing through the way that I want it to. It's the boomer effect. As soon as you start sharing your screen, the boomer effect comes into play, and then you become a boomer when it comes to technology. Um, I don't know why it's not playing. Um, well, one thing, like the thing that I'm essentially trying to call out from this video is the fact that this person in the video is taking a breath, and while he's still taking his breath, he's initiating the next stroke. So his head is out to the side, and his like arm is essentially like in this C position, which is incredibly not water dynamic. And then he's putting his head back into the water, kind of like as his hand is entering again. And so something that we really want to be working on is staying as water dynamic as we possibly can when like moving forward, which includes that period of time when you're taking a breath. So, like a couple of drills. Let me, since this video is choosing not to work at all. Yeah, I'm just gonna share this for a second. Like the problem is like not getting your head back into the water soon enough after taking a breath, and then you're pulling through the water in a not water dynamic position. And so there are a couple of things that you can think about when it comes to breath timing to ensure that you're like in as much of this like long, strong torpedo like position. And one of them is just like using a catch up drill, which will get you in this like kind of front quadrant swimming where you're like both of your arms are in the front quadrant of your body before you initiate your next stroke. So getting your head back into the water immediately after taking the breath so that when you initiate your stroke, your head and like your next arm are already essentially entering the water. Um, the Sorry, that was like a bad way of describing that because my video is not working. But like yeah, essentially what I'm trying to say is we want like the video that Conrad was showing earlier. If actually Conrad, can you pull that video back up? Are you still here?
Yep, I am.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because for whatever reason that video is not loading at all. There was a point like when you can see that as he initiates his stroke, his head has taken a breath and his head is back to neutral. And so therefore like his entire body, including his head, is in this like water dynamic position as he's pulling through. And there are a ton of athletes that I see. Yeah, let's just like let it play through for a second and see if we can catch a couple of moments when this is happening. So you can just see that he like after he takes his breath, before he initiates his stroke in his left arm, his head is back in the neutral position. And like there are just a ton of athletes that I see that initiate that next stroke while they're still taking a breath. And so like for a period of time, they're the only thing that is like at the front of their stroke is their head turned. And their recovery arm is up out of the water. They're like pushing downwards on the water to get their head up out of the water. And so they kind of look like this while moving through the water. And it's just like really slowing their body down pretty significantly. Yeah, so you can see right here, he's taking a breath and he's about to, like, he's essentially initiating his stroke right now, and his head is already almost back to neutral. Um, so yeah, catch-up drill can really like help you focus on that. I've noticed that when I like get athletes to do a catch-up drill, sometimes they might even move more quickly through the water doing the drill than they do otherwise. And just like for people that aren't aware, a catch-up drill is when you're like essentially letting your stroke completely finish and your hand come back to the front of your stroke before you initiate the next stroke. So that's really forcing you to like finish your stroke, finish your breath, and be back in this like neutral head position before you initiate the next stroke. And you can see that this swimmer is like a a bunch of his bot or like both of his arms are at the front end of his body when he initiates his neck, like the next stroke. And so he's like in this very water dynamic position. So catch up drill can be really helpful. I would also encourage using, yeah, you can see it right there again. I would encourage using fins, using a pull buoy sometimes when you're doing catch-up drill and just really focus on like turning your head, getting your head back into the water before you initiate that next stroke. Another drill that can be really helpful with this is the single arm drill that Alex was talking about earlier, but the harder version of it, which is when you've got both of your arms at your side, or like your non-stroke arm at your side. You're using, let's say, your left arm in this example to like doing just single arm, and you're breathing to the right hand side. And the way that I think about this, I call this like the freestyle like rhythm drill or like one arm rhythm drill. Is like it's three parts. You breathe, head back to neutral, and then you take the stroke. Breathe, head back to neutral, then you take the stroke. And you'll notice that a lot of athletes are like, when you're trying this for the first time, this drill, that you'll try to start your stroke while your head is out, because a lot of people use that as a compensation mechanism for like getting their head up out of the water. And so then all of a sudden your stroke will fall apart because your head is still out of the water. There's nothing propelling you forward because it's only moving you down. And then you get back into the water, your hips will start sinking, your head, your shoulders will start sinking. So single arm drill, like Alex was talking about, that's why I asked that question, Alex, is like single arm drill can be, like Chris said, all of these drills can be helpful for a lot of different things, but thinking about it from a rhythm and timing perspective, it can be really helpful for like just feeling what it feels like to be pulling while your head is in a neutral position and when your head is back in the water. So yeah, catch up drill, this freestyle rhythm drill, do it. If you breathe bilaterally, do it with on both sides. I'm sure that many of you who do breathe to both sides have noticed inefficiencies on one side or the other, and like being able to identify where those inefficiencies are can be really helpful too. So that's why I would recommend doing it on both sides if you breathe to both sides. Um, and just want to reiterate, Carol, like everybody kind of touched on this. Caroline mentioned it pretty specifically, but again, like when you're thinking about doing drills, when you're thinking about working on something, like I think all of us have probably been guilty. I definitely have been of like being at a master swim or being like swimming on my own, doing a drill, just getting through the warm up set and just like, okay, like now I'm doing single arm drill, like doing single arm, like not actually thinking about like what I'm working on in that moment. Alex said like you have to swim slow to swim fast. But like when you're doing drills, it's not helpful to like only be semi-engaged. Like if there's a time during your swim when you want to be like really focused and engaged on improving, it's when you're doing drills that are focused on improving your stroke in a specific way. Um, so yeah. Um, Questions, thoughts about just like the timing of the breath and how you can work on it?
No, I think you
All
covered it.
right.
Is it
All
Derek
right.
Stone?
Yep, I'm not gonna share my screen, but I know we're at the top of the hour now, and I'll go through this pretty quickly so everyone can get back to their day. But one of the reoccurring themes I see, especially with newer swimmers, is tr athletes trying to extend as far as they can, which tends to lead to overreaching. Or they enter the water and their hand actually curves back up, which almost creates a break. Like, so when people are overreaching, they're basically just hitting the top of the water, smacking it, and a few things are happening with that. Um, you know, the rotation is disrupted. It's creating more drag, and it can potentially put a little bit more strain on the shoulder as well. So when athletes are entering the water, and this is kind of going back to the opposite issue that Chris Haig was talking about, but you want your fingertips to enter at an angle. And I always use the cue of like, okay, if your arm is out extended in front of you, if you're between, your elbow and your wrist, that's where you want to enter, probably closer to that wrist. So that way your fingers are entering at an angle, you're slicing into the water rather than extending your way out and slapping the top of the water. That will help set you guys up for a really good catch. So all this kind of ties in, each one of these components that we're all talking about ties into everyone else's topic that they discuss. Like So the overreaching, if you can correct that, it's going to set yourself up for a good catch that Alex talked about, and um, just help propel you a little bit more as well. So again, I just want to reiterate, enter a little bit closer, probably aim for that wrist rather than reaching too far out. And because the other part of that too is your rotation is disrupted. And with that, your timing of the kicks are off and things like that as well. So when you guys are thinking about correcting this, it's a really good idea to get video of it because you may think you're entering the water and slicing in, but getting someone on deck to get eyes on you or seeing a video of you actually entering the water is gonna be really helpful. A couple of drills to help correct this would be the fingertip drag. So as you guys drag your fingers across the water, you can see where your hand is and slice in at that point. Um, Closed fist drill. This is more probably for developing an early vertical forearm and a better catch. But if you are using a closed fist and you're entering as well, the time if you slow it down and you're timing it well, you can enter again, aiming for that wrist entry point, and that'll help as well. I know people talked about this already as well, but single arm drills are super beneficial for this as well because it's going to help you create awareness around that entry point as well as you slow things down. With all these drills, it probably is beneficial to use a pull buoy. That way you can just think about the forward momentum and not your hips dragging and things like that. I'll leave it at that. Any questions about overreaching?
No, I mean, I would just say that I very often see um, athletes gently sort of placing their hand on the water upon entry. And usually that's because, oftentimes they might be breathing late or not rotating well. And we want to think about that kind of assertive entry because what that's going to do, sort of like what Susanna Miguel was talking about, when we think about like entry on the right side and kicking on the left at the same time, you're coupling all of these things together. And when you start doing that, you kind of feel the surge of propulsion and your core and all the kinetic energy flowing in the correct way and actually applying to your stroke in your pool. So, this is definitely it's another possible way to think about this is entering assertively fingertips first.
I have one more comment to make that Derek brought up, which is if you haven't ever seen yourself swim, like find a way to see yourself swim. It'll help you identify maybe which of these things we're talking about would be like a low hanging fruit or some of the lowest hanging fruit for you to work on. And like it was one of the reasons why I wanted to be able to show that video of the athlete that I coached because that was the first time that he had ever seen himself swim, and he had been watching a bunch of videos of people swimming really well, and the proprioception in the water is like very difficult. So a lot of times people don't realize that like the flaws that they have are in fact flaws. Like crossover like being a thing and like not really feeling that. The thing that Derek mentioned about like pulling really wide, just stuff that you don't realize that you're doing, especially as you fatigue. It can be really, really helpful to see yourself swim to like know that those things are happening. So yeah, if you haven't ever taken video yourself or gotten somebody to videotape you, it can be a really helpful implement in this process.
Yeah, it is essential. You definitely don't swim like you think you are. Does anybody else have any comments or questions or any breakthroughs that they experienced after addressing a stroke flaw?
Can I ask one question?
Mhm.
This has been incredibly informative. I've been struggling with my swim stroke for years and feel like I've got tons of notes. So thank you guys. The one question I had is on I have not figured out the timing of my kick. And so I'm a little bit confused because I've heard it said both ways, I feel like, and maybe both are true, but like how is it the same? Should be kicking down with the same arm that's stroking or pulling or the opposite?
So you kick right before you pull on the same side. You enter right when the leg on the opposing side is kicking.
Okay.
So
So you got to choose one to think about because if you try to do
Right.
both,
Depend.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, like I think I'm the one that brought that confusion up early on. I mean, for me, I'm not a particularly coordinated person. Um, I do better with cross body cues. If someone tells me to, lift my right arm and my left leg at the same time, I do that quicker if they tell me to lift my right arm and my right leg at the same. Like I do better with cross body cues. I know that about myself. So that's why I kind of like the right arm enters when the left foot kicks down cue. But I know lots of other people that they much prefer same body cues for picking up on that type of thing. So Meredith, it might be a little bit of just what works better for you.
And I think it's like about separating the entry and the initiation of the stroke is like really what's important here is like it's not about like don't think about like your stroke. Like I think the way you said it was like stroking with one arm. Like if you think about it as like stroking as this big broad basket that includes entry and initiation of the stroke, then like that's where there can be a lot of confusion here. And so like opposite leg like at entry and then same leg at the like actual initiation of the stroke is like really what's happening. And that it feels like two opposite things, but it's really the same thing that we're saying, but it's about like when the cue is happening.
got it. That's super helpful. Thank you.
One thing I learned last year, I went to a swim clinic. If you put fins on or just like one fin and you're floating in the water and you do like the most powerful single kick you've ever done in your life with one leg, one time, you'll feel it start and like it'll move, it'll make your hip turn and keep your arms at your side and just do like one single kick. And if you are in the water floating, you'll feel your whole upper body move with you. And so that's kind of helpful to then feel, okay, if I'm kicking, then my left side is like my right is getting pulled down, my left is getting out of the water. That's when I'm pulling and like getting that arm out. So just try it. You're going to feel super silly, but again, like you're floating in the water, one single kick, and just feel that. And then do it again. And then like do the other side on the way back. Mm-hmm.
Good questions. Any others or any thoughts? No? Well, I guess that wraps it up. Thanks for hopping on, everybody, and we can definitely keep the conversation going on Slack. And athletes, feel free to post videos of you swimming, and then coaches will offer their 2 cents on how to improve. But good seeing everybody, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.